Hey everyone, Nathan here, Absurd Being. Okay, so this is the last kind of video dedicated to memory. 2 videos ago we looked at the way that memory actualizes in perception. In the last video we talked about pure memory, which is, and the basic takeaway I guess from that, I don't think I put it in so many words, but is that memory is basically the past, which means that it's basically duration, but it's kind of duration which has been preserved by a living being. So, and I didn't mention this in the last video, but I've mentioned it before. Memory, what memory does is it prolongs those states that have taken place, that succession of states. It prolongs a succession of states into the present and contracts them so that they're apprehendable in a single intuition. And that's basically what this whole thing is talking about, the way that pure memory actualizes in perception when we're looking at external objects, the way it, and what we're going to look at today, the way that pure memory is related to habit memory. So how it actualizes in the body. And that's what we're looking at right now. And we'll start by talking about Bergson's cone. Okay, so, I mean, I've just called it Bergson's cone. That's not its official name. I don't think Bergson gave it an official name. Maybe it's just a cone for him. But for me, it's Bergson's cone. And what we're looking at here, like I said before, this is how pure memory, which Bergson also calls spirit, and we'll talk more about that later, how that relates to habit memory, i.e. the body and movement. So if you remember the reflective perception diagram from 2 videos ago, looking like this, which showed the relation between memory and perception, the way that memory kind of was brought to bear on objects. The diagram we're going to be looking at today explains the relation between pure memory, again the past, and habit memory, so the body or the sensori-motor present. And that diagram looks like this. And at the bottom there, so it's kind of an inverted cone, I guess. At the bottom, at point S, that's the present or the body. We can kind of think of it as the body. It's where that sensori-motor present anyway. That plane P is the moving plane of my actual representation of the universe. So that's kind of what we, in a way, I guess it's like perception, right? It's what we're seeing, what we're engaging with in the world. And the cone itself, SAB, is all of my recollections in memory. And if we go right to the top there, the AB, that, what is it, circle, oval, that's my pure past. And that, Bergson says, is motionless. So that's the pure past, and you've got that funneling down into S, the sensori-motor present. So I want to read a quote Bergson gives here to just kind of describe this in a bit more detail. The basic idea, bodily habit memory is at S and true memory is at AB. So on the one hand, the memory of the past offers to the sensori-motor mechanisms all the recollections capable of guiding them in their task and of giving to the motor reaction the direction suggested by the lessons of experience. But on the other hand, the sensori-motor apparatus furnish to ineffective, that is unconscious, memories the means of taking on a body, of materializing themselves, in short, of becoming present. In other words, it is from the present that comes the appeal to which memory responds, and it is from the sensori-motor elements of present action that a memory borrows the warmth which gives it life. Okay, nice. So kind of a long quote, but shows nicely, I think, that connection between pure memory at the top there and sensory-motor apparatus, the body, the way that we engage in the world. And these two, importantly, and this is the nice feature of the diagram, they're not separate. So they're always together, even though they are different things. So again, we have to bear that in mind. The pure memory and perception are completely different. They're not differences in degree, they're differences in kind, but they function, they work, they always appear together. And Bergson talks about the way that, actually, let me mention this first. This is quite reminiscent of the earlier diagram I showed of reflective perception, and the same kind of principle applies. Memories are coming from pure memory. Again, that's an abstract, that it's not really separate, but it helps to think of it as separate just to kind of get a grip on this. So memories come from there and kind of flow into the object to give it meaning for us, to give it context, to give it a sense. That's what I'm looking for, to give it a sense. And something similar happens here with habit memory, with action, with the body. Pure memory flows through or comes down that cone into the body to facilitate action, to facilitate movement, which is then guided. It's not random. It's not a purely. It's not trapped in the present, just responding, reflex, stimulus reflex kind of way of engaging with the world. It's actually tapping into past experience and kind of utilizing that so that we're guided by things that have happened to us before. He talks about the way that being at the extreme of pure memory, so up at that AB level, makes one a dreamer. So this kind of person is always living in memories. And the opposite then, to live too much in the present, at that point, that S, that makes one a person of impulse. So always living in the present like an animal, he says. So, and that's really a key distinction Bergson draws between humans and other animals. Their capacity for that, for engagement with things like memory, with being able to step back from that loop of the present, that kind of present sensation, which kind of keeps you trapped there. And the other thing that is interesting here is that this whole process can't be mechanical. So it's not just cause and effect. It's not reducible to mechanical impulses, and which is the associationist model, right? And the reason it can't be mechanical, this process of memories flowing into the sensory-motor present, is that all ideas share some similarities. And so if it's purely mechanical, then there's really no rhyme or reason as to why certain memories come through when they do, because all memories share something in common with present perceptions, present sensations. This is what Bergson says about it. Association has made ideas and images into independent entities floating in an inward space, drawing near to each other when chance brings them within the sphere of mutual attraction. Its error is that it overly intellectualizes ideas. It attributes to them a purely speculative role because it believes that they exist for themselves and not for us, and overlooks the relation which they bear to the activity of the will. If memories move about, indifferent, in a consciousness that is both lifeless and shapeless, there is no reason why the present perception should prefer and attract any one of them. So I think that's a really good point. There's this can't be explained by chance mechanism, by chance random association, because all ideas are associated in some way. All ideas bear some similarity to my present perception, whether it's the room that I'm in, right? How many ideas, how many memories do I have of this room? Why aren't all of those being brought to bear? Or the colors that I'm seeing. What about my associations, previous memories of those colors? The things that I'm seeing, phones, beds, whatever, printers, computers, all of my memories should be coming to bear all the time on all of these things. But they don't. We have a more targeted, the memories that we bring to bear on our present situations are more targeted, more focused. And that's because they bear on the activity of the will. And again, connecting this to my present disposition, my present goals, my present thoughts, what I'm directing myself towards. It's not an abstract intellectual activity. It's not the activity of a purely it's not a purely speculative process, which is again how we tend to think about the mind and consciousness. So Bergson is again bringing this stuff into, he's grounding it. He's bringing this stuff down to earth, because that's where we are. That's what we fundamentally are. We're engaged in the world. We're acting in the world. We're behaving in the world. We've got goals that we're trying to accomplish, things we're trying to do. Everything is turns on that first and foremost. It's not that we're first and foremost a detached consciousness with no attachments anywhere, with no investment in the world. We are always already in the world, engaged in projects, doing things, moving in directions, moving towards certain goals and away from others. And that tie, that connection, I think, like I said, really grounds Bergson's philosophy here. Okay, cool. So then the question is, we've got this nice cone, and this talk of memories, pure memory, kind of being drawn down that cone into our sensori-motor present, into our bodies as we act. But how does this happen? That's what Bergson wants to explain, and he does that by talking about a double movement of expansion and contraction. So I originally called this, and I think this is what Bergson calls it too, the double movement of expansion and contraction of consciousness. I cut that out because I don't want to get bogged down with that word just yet. I do want to come back to consciousness a little bit later on, but I think it's a distraction for us at the moment. Basically because it doesn't mean anything. At this point, we haven't defined it. We haven't tried to talk about it in any real detail. So I think including it just muddies the waters. So let's just call it the double movement of expansion and contraction. And basically what this looks to explain is the associations of similarity and contiguity that affect this movement of memories into the sensori-motor present. So at S, that habit, that locale of habit memory, that point at which habit memory is working, associations of similarity and contiguity happen naturally because they're lived and not thought. We're not deliberating. At that point, we're just acting. We're acting kind of without thought, right? That's what habit memory means, is that our actions are, I guess, to bring in a kind of Sartre, Merleau-Ponty term, non-thetic. So we're not explicitly deliberating. We're not thinking about what we're doing. We're just engaged. When we pick up a cup, we're not thinking about the actions, the logistics involved in that. We're just our body does it, our bodies do it naturally. So that's what we're talking about, this kind of, and actually I should have said that a long time ago. That's what we are, that's what we're discussing here, this habit memory, the way that we are actively, originally, primordially engaged with things. So this is not that level of, we're not stepping back, intellectualizing, we're not thinking, we're not reflecting on things, on what we're doing. It's what we do when we live our lives and the way we interact with ordinary everyday things, kind of without that level of reflective thought. And that's what we are really getting at here. Even that habit memory, it's not without connection with pure memory. That's I didn't mention that before, and I really should have. So that sensori-motor present, that S, that's where this kind of habit memory, the memories that our bodies have, the memories that our bodies have that allow us to do things in a sense automatically, without reflectively considering what we're doing. But even these kinds of movements have this engagement have this connection with pure memory. And the connection is through these associations of similarity and contiguity. Contiguity being basically like sharing, connected kind of at the edges. Like the definition is like sharing a common border. So kind of side by side, and sharing some kind of connection through that proximity, as opposed to two things which are similar. So things that just share a resemblance with each other. Those have that kind of connection as well. So okay, let me get back on track. At S, associations of similarity and contiguity happen naturally because they're lived, not thought. And at AB, their level of pure memory, no two memories are the same or contiguous, or rather, all are, because all memories are similar or contiguous in some way. So there's no special similarity or connection between any two memories. So that's a really important point, and we talked about that before when we talked about all ideas sharing some similarities. There's, to say that they all share similarities and contiguities is to say that they have none. There is no special similarities or contiguities connecting any two ideas. So okay, we have that situation. But these 2 points at S and at AB, these are the extremes. And we're not usually at either one of these points alone. Rather, Bergson says we oscillate between the two. And that's really the key point here. And we oscillate in 2 ways. So there's a double movement here. That's the double movement we talked about at the beginning, expansion and contraction. So let's have a look at expansion first. There are always some dominant memories, shining points round which the others form a vague nebulosity. These shining points are multiplied in the degree in which our memory expands. The work of localization, finding groups of memories that are contiguous, consists in reality in a growing effort of expansion, by which the memory, always present in its entirety to itself, spreads out its recollections over an ever wider surface, and so ends by distinguishing, in what was till then a confused mass, the remembrance which could not find its proper place. Okay, so this is basically, the idea is explaining how expansion shows memories in more detail, and he talks about those shining points being multiplied in the degree in which our memory expands. So when we kind of, in a sense, when we move up that cone, as we move further up, our memory, we're not going further back in time, right? That AB at every point in actually, I'll show you the diagram first. It looks like this. And at every point in there, every AB kind of cross section of that diagram, we're not going further back in time, but we're just seeing the same, the totality of our memories kind of spread over a larger surface. So in a way, we're getting more detail. So it doesn't get to other parts of memory. That's the important thing that I wanted to stress there. Memory is always whole at every one of those levels at AB. So that was the first thing. Those shining points are multiplied. And this idea that the dominant memories, there are always dominant memories or shining points. I like that idea because that is, again, that's the way that how we live our lives. That's normally, when we remember things, we don't remember everything, but we remember these key moments. And those are the shining points around which other ideas kind of flock. And as we move further up that cone, our memory expands, or our consciousness expands into those memories, we get more details, and we kind of flesh out what we're looking for. And so this then explains association by contiguity instead of the associationist model, which is purely mechanical and works by chance because there's nothing else going on there. It explains association by contiguity through having those dominant memories that mean something to me, that are relevant to my situation, my current sensori-motor present, that are relevant to my current goals, my what I'm trying to do in that moment, that mean things to me, that have special significance for me, those dominant memories. And they're kind of the beacons around which other ideas, other memories are available to me. So that gets us that idea of connection, ideas being connected to each other. They're connected through this collection in which there are these shining beacons which bring some sense of order, some coherence to this mass. So that's the expansion movement. The other movement is contraction, and this will explain association by similarity. So here's the quote: "Memory, laden with the whole of the past, responds to the appeal of the present state by two simultaneous movements, one of translation, by which it moves in its entirety to meet experience, thus contracting more or less, though without dividing, with a view to action. The other of rotation upon itself, by which it turns towards the situation of the moment, presenting to it that side of itself which may prove to be the most useful. To these varying degrees of contraction correspond the various forms of association by similarity." So again, we've got this idea moving from, we're in that cone. This time though, instead of going up, expanding into more detailed memories, expanding into our memories in a more, so that we have a more detailed picture, we are going the other way, contracting into the present. And so those memories are moving from that virtual state to the actual state, which is that sensori-motor present at S. And again, the diagram shows us they're moving through those different cross sections or planes of AB. Again, they're all present. We're not kind of cutting away parts of our memory, parts of our lives at each point. We're not getting less, but the entirety of our past is contracting as it goes down. So by the time it gets to S, so it's contracting first to move down that cone, but it's also rotating upon itself so that the memory that we want, the memory that bears most similarity to the present moment in terms of my goals, what's happening around me, the context, so on and so forth, so that that memory can provide the most use to help me navigate that situation. And so this then explains association by similarity, again, instead of the mechanical associationist model, by appealing to that sensory-motor present, which draws the memory out of, draws a similar memory, not randomly, not by chance, not mechanically, but through a direction that has relevance, that has significance in my current situation. And so this whole process, this double movement of expansion and contraction, is guided, Bergson says, by disposition. Another word he uses there is will. I'll come back to those in just a moment, but it's guided by disposition or will. He talks about hearing someone speak a word in a foreign language, and this may make me think of either that language in general or of a specific voice which I've heard pronounce the same word before. But these associations are not random, they're not mechanical, they're not they don't arise by chance. Instead, they answer to two different mental dispositions, either pure image or action. And so if it's pure image, then I get that perhaps the more abstract notion of that language in general. But if it's more action, practical, more useful, more geared toward that point S, more geared towards action, then I'll think of perhaps a voice which I've heard before pronouncing that same word. And just to come back to that term disposition, I think you could probably substitute that for consciousness here. But again, I don't want to get into consciousness just yet, but disposition and will, I think the important thing to remember though with this is that for sure, absolutely, we're not talking about a disengaged entity, right? Not a mind that is removed from the world. So, and that's the mistake. That's where you get Cartesian dualism, where we're thinking of the mind as something separate, the mind as something dispassionate, disengaged, detached, speculative. All of these words apply, which then kind of is viewing the world around it, and then we have to kind of explain this thing. But for Bergson, everything is happening. That's his point, right? This is all happening at the same time, together. The perception, the sensory-motor point S is not. It's not different. It's separate from. It's a different thing from the pure memory, but it's not. It's not an isolated thing. It's not an independent thing. Those things function together as a whole. And so when he talks about something like disposition or will or consciousness, he's not talking about a disengaged, disembodied, unextended phenomenon we have to somehow explain in some way. It's always fundamentally engaged, even if it is, and even though it's fundamentally engaged, it can engage with the world in a couple of different ways. It can engage more with those memories, slightly more abstract, in an more abstract sense, so getting a picture of language in general, or it can engage with more practical, this moment goals, and my current direction, responses to the current situation, in which case we get something like maybe the sound that I've heard someone pronounce that word before. But either way, this word disposition, this word consciousness, it's something fundamentally brought down to earth. It's engaged. It's wrapped up in the world. It's not this. There's nothing mysterious to explain. I think that's the best way to put it. There's nothing mysterious here that we have to try and get our heads around. I'm really jumping the gun. I'm going to get into consciousness a little bit later, but yeah, this process is guided by disposition, consciousness, but don't think of it as this, as kind of throwing in like a spirit or a mind, capital M mind, that we have to just kind of believe in. I'll try and flesh that out at a later point. And finally, he brings us back to pathology, which is another great thing about Bergson, that he tied his philosophy into the science of the day. But he did it in such a way too that I think he's not bound to it, because obviously science progresses. Scientific opinions of 50 years ago are not the same opinions we hold today. But Bergson's Bergson's philosophy all aligns with the science of his day, but in such a way that it's not committed to it, so that when that science inevitably changes, we don't have to throw away Bergson's philosophy with that old science. It may turn out that it doesn't match, but I think it's fairly robust. I don't think there's anything he said, not in what I've read anyway, that I can see, that is like contradicted by any of the more modern, more recent discoveries in psychology or neuroscience. Not that I'm particularly up to date with those either, but for me it seems that he's withstood the test of time, and it's really good that he's engaging with the science too. So he's making sure that his philosophies align with science, which is something that Merleau-Ponty really did as well, and received a lot of praise for. But people just forgot about Bergson, that he started it. So anyway, he goes back to pathology for us to check this. And he talks about retrogressive amnesia. I think we call it retrograde amnesia these days. But basically where events in the past are forgotten. Here's the quote. "The recollections which disappear from consciousness are probably preserved in remote planes of memory, and the patient can find them there by an exceptional effort like that which is effected in the hypnotic state. But on the lower planes, these memories await, so to speak, the dominant image to which they may be fastened. A sharp shock, a violent emotion, forms the decisive event to which they cling, and if this event, by reason of its sudden character, is cut off from the rest of our history, they follow it into oblivion. We can understand, then, that the oblivion which follows a physical or moral shock should include the events which immediately preceded it, a phenomenon which is very difficult to explain in all other conceptions of memory." So such a beautiful idea, and really such a great insight, I think. Back to that idea, the conception of memory as being on those planes, being kind of clustered around dominant dominant points, shining points, those dominant memories. And so when there's some kind of violent event or trauma or something, and that causes that memory to be, that dominant memory to be cut off from our history, right, due to its sudden nature, its sudden character, then it takes with it all of the other ideas, all of the other memories that were clustered around it. And so we can then explain why, when you have that traumatic event, that sudden shock, that car accident or whatever, then memories of the last, the hours leading up to it, or days leading up to it, or weeks leading up to it, they also follow it into oblivion because they were connected to it in some way. It's not that parts of the brain have disappeared, which the parts of the brain which contained the memories, we've already looked at how unlikely or implausible that is, but rather it's the memories haven't even been deleted. They're still there, Bergson thinks. And I think he's right in a lot of cases, because those memories come back sometimes. But so what we have is an access problem. And the access, it's not physical. It's not that electrical signals aren't getting through to certain parts of the brain where those memories are stored, which still doesn't explain why the 2 weeks leading up to that car accident are suddenly inaccessible for you, as if you're, presumably all of those 2 weeks aren't clustered in the same part of your brain. So, however, there just seems to be no way to really properly explain that if we're thinking of the brain as a storage place for ideas. Rather, we have this access problem where your memories are clustered around that key point by time. Right? What connects them it's a temporal connection. They all happen around the same time, and the dominant memory there that they clustered around has now been cut off from us for some reason because of its sudden nature. And so we have this inability to access them. I think that's a really nice way of thinking about it that explains retrogressive amnesia in a way that to be honest, to be fair, I don't know how psychologists explain amnesia today, or if they even can, or neuroscientists. But the notion that parts of our brain are not firing in the right way, or that we're not getting access to parts of our brain that have those memories, that store those memories, just doesn't seem plausible. It doesn't seem to work for me. Nice. And finally, and this is just a little thing I put in here, I wondered, is this, you might object to this and say, have we explained this? I mean, I said, Bergson's going to tell us how this cone, these memories are kind of pulled into the present moment, and the way they are is through this double movement of expansion and contraction. But is that an explanation, or isn't it just more metaphors? Don't we just have, we don't have any kind of concrete, solid an objective explanation here? And you could object to that. You could object with that. But I think the problem with that is that when you're thinking of explanation, the word explanation, what an explanation means, you're thinking in scientific, mechanistic, cause-effect terms. And so you're looking for an answer that fits in that kind of, in that mold, something that's quantitative, something that we can measure, we can gauge, we can affect through, applying current voltages or currents at certain parts of the brain, and so on and so forth. You're looking for something materialistic, something that's spatial, right? You're looking for a spatial explanation. But that is precisely what we can't have here. We can't have a quantitative, quantifiable, mechanistic cause-effect explanation here. So the objection, it's just kind of missing the point, because it's essentially demanding that we explain memory, duration, time in terms of space. It comes back to that, which is a theme we've seen recurrent throughout these videos, and it just can't be done. And so you're never going to have that satisfying feel of, yes, this gives us a nice explanation. I can take that to the bank. I can I can put that away and it's solved. You don't get that because it's not the kind of thing that admits of that kind of an explanation. Duration, time, memory, these aren't things that we can bundle up and explain in quantifiable scientific terms. So it doesn't sound like an explanation, but it is. It is, because we're explaining things the way we're explaining things the way they are, on their own terms, in terms of duration, in terms of time, and that's in terms of qualitative multiplicities, and that's the only way that we can possibly hope to really explain these things. Okay, summary. So this video was basically pure memory and habit memory, looking at the relation between the two. We started off by looking at Bergson's cone, that diagram. The process by which pure memory becomes actualized into habit memory is guided by will or disposition, so not mechanical association. And the details of how that process played out was the double movement of expansion, which explained contiguity, the connection between different memories, through that idea of dominant memories acting as shining points, which bring coherence and organize other memories. And the other half of that double movement, contraction, which explained similarities between memories. And that basically was the sensori-motor connection. So the way that things bear on our current, present situations and our goals and the context that we're acting in, and so on and so forth. And this, we finally looked at this whole thing being supported through looking at and trying to explain retrograde amnesia. We saw that Bergson's ideas here do explain amnesia in a way that otherwise we find very difficult to explain, especially if we think of the brain as a storage container for memories. Okay, cool. That is memory. That's all I have to say about memory, actually. I'm sure I'm going to mention memory. Actually, I am going to mention memory later. We're going to look at how spirit and matter are connected, and that's Bergson's duality. I think that's next, actually. Just before I go, though, there is also one article on Bergson I thought I'd draw your attention to. I'll put a link to it in the description box below. A friend of mine actually drew my attention to it, made me aware of it. It's quite a nice article. It's not so long, but it looks at the connection kind of between Bergson and postmodernism, which may sound like a kind of random thing for me to throw in here, but at the very end of the article, the last part of it, the last section, the author talks about pure memory, or talks about memory and some of the interpretation, some of the consequences that follow from Bergson's account of memory. And that was really interesting. I couldn't really fit it in here into the video because it kind of took us further afield from where I was, from the kind of core that I wanted to explain. But it's a really nice, it's a nice piece, and it's an interesting read. And yet there's that section on memory which I thought was quite interesting as well, and you might enjoy. Anyway, thanks for listening as always, and I will catch you in the next video.